Hey baseball fans, I'm Matt Gross, aka the Rhode Island Rocky fan. Welcome to another episode of Purple Row Video, where today we're going to discuss the things that are quiet in the off season, but not really as quiet as you might think if you know where to look and how things are going to impact the future. Because the one thing I want to talk about today is what's not happening on the free agent market and why that may be significant to what happens to the Rockies in the future. And particularly what I want to look at is the 13 players who received qualifying offers at the beginning of the offseason, and specifically the 5 that have not signed anywhere yet. So if you're not familiar with the process, just quickly to go over it, at the end of each season, when a player is a free agent, each team can offer each of their free agents a qualifying offer if they want, and that qualifying offer would consist of a 1-year deal around $14 million. The player then can either accept that 1-year deal for $14 million, or they can go off and become a free agent. If they go off and become a free agent, the new team that signs that player is going to lose a draft pick, either the 11th through 30th pick in either the first round pick if they were picking 11 through 30, or a second round pick if the team was picking 1 through 10. And then the team that loses the player is going to receive a draft pick in between the first and second round, which is usually going to be somewhere between the 30th and 35th pick. But basically, there's a penalty for signing these players who received qualifying offers. Now, beginning of the offseason, 13 players received qualifying offers. All of them rejected it and became free agents. Now, so far, we've seen 8 of them sign. But if you start doing a little bit of the math, you start digging a little bit, you'll find that nobody's really willing to give up first-round draft picks, with the exception of the Yankees, who are just blowing through every single stop sign when it comes to this. But let's first of all go over the 8 guys who have signed so far, and it really tells you a story about how teams are not willing to part with the first round pick, right? So you got 8 guys. First 2, Hiroki Kuroda and Mike Napoli. They, even though they rejected the qualifying offer, ended up going back to their original team, Yankees and Red Sox. So they're off the table. They're not going to cost anybody draft picks because they went back to their original team. Then you have the Yankees, who signed Brian McCann, Jacoby Ellsbury, and Carlos Beltran. That was 3 of them. Boom, boom, boom. And they actually wiped out what could have been a very, very deep draft for them, where they could have gotten as many as 3 picks inside the top 35 or so. Now they're going to have none of them because by signing those picks, they lose their first round pick, which is going to be around 18 or 19, and then they lose 2 more picks that they would have received for Robinson Cano and Curtis Granderson signing elsewhere. They were set to receive 2 more picks in between the first and second round. Both those are gone. So the Yankees now are not going to pick till about 56 or 57 in the draft with their second round pick. So they're going to get nothing good out of this draft unless they really, really, really hit that pick at the end of the second round. Still, not saying it's impossible. I shouldn't say it's impossible, but it's going to be much, much more difficult. Because that's where you lose draft experience. So the Yankees went big. They signed those 3 players. Look at the players the Yankees lost, though. You had Robinson Cano, who went to Seattle, whose first round pick was protected. So the pick they lost, it was early in the second round. That's like pick number 40. And then Curtis Granderson for the Mets. The Mets also had their first round pick protected. So again, you're looking at a pick in the early 40s that they gave up. Not nearly as costly as one, let's say, around 15th or 20th in the draft. Not nearly as much value there. So you had teams with second round picks signing players. And then the only other player who you have left on the table here, as far as guys who would cost first round picks to have signed, is Texas signing Sin-Soo Choo. But even that one, I would argue, they didn't really give up the first round pick. And I would argue that because Texas, remember, was picking late in the first round, somewhere around pick number 20. Well, if they go sign Sin-Soo Choo, they're basically replacing him. They're basically replacing Nelson Cruz with Sin-Soo Choo. And they say, well, if we don't sign Sin-Soo Choo here, we would just probably end up re-signing Nelson Cruz anyway, and then therefore we wouldn't get the extra draft pick the supplemental draft pick that came between the first and second round. So all they really did is they said, we're going to pick Choo over Cruz, and we're going to move down a pick. We're going to move down in the draft from about 20 to 32, 33, wherever that supplemental pick ends up being, that they're going to get for somebody else signing Nelson Cruz, because now that the Rangers have Sin-Soo Choo, they are not going to sign Nelson Cruz. So basically, they didn't really give up their first round pick as much as they moved down 10 or 12 slots to get a player who is vastly superior at getting on base than Nelson Cruz, and also is not connected to performance-enhancing drugs, which is also appealing to them. So basically, when you boil it down, so even though you have 8 guys who have signed so far, when you really boil it down, only one team has really been willing to throw away draft picks to get these players, or throw away high draft picks, and that is the New York Yankees, who gave up 3 of them, essentially, the way it worked out, because of the one they had in the first round and the 2 that they would have had before Cano and Granderson leaving. But with McCann, Ellsbury, and Beltran, boom, 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 they wiped them out. So essentially, you have 5 players still sitting there on the free agent market who are given qualifying offers who haven't really gotten much attention yet, because nobody wants to give up these first round picks, and they are Ervin Santana, Ubaldo Jimenez, Kendrys Morales, the aforementioned Nelson Cruz, and Steven Drew. Now, the reason why this is really, really interesting to me is because it kind of sets up a map for the future as far as what these players are going to do in terms of accepting or rejecting these qualifying offers. Now, so far, this system has been in place for 2 seasons. You had 13 this year. I believe it was 9 last year. I have to double check the exact number. But in any case, in both seasons, I know that every single player rejected the qualifying offer and went to free agency. What's going to be interesting here, particularly with the pitchers, with Kendrys Morales and Ubaldo Jimenez, is how much money are they going to receive when somebody finally signs them? Because if they still make a lot of money, they're certainly going to make less than they would have if they didn't have that qualifying offer attached to them, where the team's going to lose the first round draft pick. But it's going to be very, very interesting to see where they end up going and how much they get. Because if you start looking ahead, the Rockies have some guys after the 2014 season who may end up being in the same boat, right? Jorge De La Rosa is a free agent after this year. Michael Kadire is a free agent after this year. Brett Anderson, who you really, really, really want to pitch well, has a $12 million option for 2015. But if you think about it this way, if Brett Anderson can stay off the DL and suddenly, reach his potential, if the Rockies hit a home run in that trade, all of a sudden he could pitch great in 2014, which could help them be successful this year. They could pick up the $12 million option in 2015 if he pitches well again next year. Then you could throw a qualifying offer on him after the 2015 season, and you could reject it, and then you could get a good draft pick out of it. You could end up with a pick around 30-35, which ends up being really, really valuable. I'll go over that in a second, too. So you start looking at these guys like De La Rosa and Kadire, and potentially Anderson if everything really goes well. You have to have a lot break well, but that could be the gift that keeps on giving if that works out well. And then even Yoli Chacin, after the 2016 season, there's a lot of potential here for the Rockies to give guys qualifying offers that they may reject, and then they could start picking up extra draft picks. And the reason why I think this is important is the way that teams are refusing to part with that first-round draft pick to sign these free agents. Like I said, we've seen it so far. The only team that has been willing to part with them so far is the New York Yankees. And I think that's really, really telling how valuable these are. Well, just looking at this year's draft, the Rockies already have 3 picks in the top 50. They're going to have the number 8 overall pick because they were bad last year. They're going to have a pick around 34, 35 for what they call a competitive balance round pick. And what that is, each year, the 12 teams who have the smallest, market size and TV contracts and basically the 12 little guys, it would take too long to go into the details, get picks each year, but 6 of them get it between the first and second round, which is basically picks 35 to 40. And then the other 6 end up with it between picks 70 and 75. Last year, the Rockies ended up in the pick 70 and 75 window. This year, because it's based off 2012 record, they get the first pick available, which is going to be right around pick 35. Also, because they were bad in 2013, it's done by lottery, but they're likely to get a pick somewhere between 35 and 40 again in the 2015 draft next year. So they should have this 2 years in a row where they get a pick right behind, 3-4 picks behind, where you would get a pick for a guy rejecting a qualifying offer and going in a free agency. They're gonna have it next year, guaranteed. They've got it around 35, but they're gonna have another one probably next year. A likelihood if the lottery balls fall their way, which they're likely to do. I'd say about a 70-80% chance that that's gonna happen. Again, they're going to get one no matter what, but it's more likely that it's going to end up falling between 35 and 40 than it will between 70 and 75. So if you look at it, and then for going back to 2014, they have the 8th pick overall, this comp balance round pick around 35, and then they're going to have another pick around 49 or 50, depending on where these remaining 5 free agents sign early in the second round. So 3 picks in the top 50 is pretty darn good when you start looking at it. Oh, there's a real chance to hit them. If you go back, right, Rex Brothers, I think, was picked around number 34. Nolan Arenado was picked somewhere in the 50s. He was a second round pick. I believe Chad Betts was a second round pick as well, but I think he may have been later on in the year after the Rockies were better. Trevor Story, they got him in a pick somewhere in the 30s after they signed Octavio Dotel for about a month, and then he ended up being a reliever. He ended up being under the old Elias system where he ended up ranking the top 40% of relievers, and they got a pick out of that. Eddie Butler was picked somewhere in the 30s as well. Ryan McMahon was picked in the 30s in the 2013 draft. That's a name you're going to hear more about in the Purple Row prospects coming up probably in the next year or two. He looks like he could have a very nice ceiling as well. So, but I mean, the point is, you have a lot of guys. You can hit on guys in that area of the draft. And if you want to go really big around Major League Baseball, Joey Votto, David Wright, and Adam Jones of the Orioles, for instance, were all in that, 30 to 50 pick range. So you can't hit, it's not a guarantee, so there's a lot of losers in that area as well. But the point is, if you start piling up picks in that area, you can be very, very you can be successful and create a very, very deep farm system. And the point is, the Rockies kind of have a lot of talent in the lower levels right now. You're talking the mid to lower levels, really, with Gray and Butler and Dahl, a lot of big names who could really become even more attractive by this summer if they start moving up. And then you add on to that 3 picks in the top 50 this year. They could get another 3 picks next year, even if they play well, because they could have a pick, depending on where they are in the first round. But if they play well, they could have won the end of the first round. They're probably going to get a competitive balance round pick again between 35 and 40. And then depending on what happens with De La Rosa and Kadire, and what happens with these 5 free agents here, which tells us will they reject or accept qualifying offers, how likely are they to do that? Easy for me to say. You could have Jorge De La Rosa and Michael Kadire giving you another pick in the 30 to 35 range next year because of those rejected qualifying offers. So you could, theoretically, you have to have a lot of things go right. You have to get the lottery ball, and then you have to have, one of these guys play well and then reject the qualifying offer. But you could have 3 picks in the top 40, 45 again next year, even better than the top 50, even though you wouldn't have that top 10 pick next year. Hopefully you wouldn't, because that means the Rockies could finish one of the 10 worst records if that doesn't happen. But the point is, and then you throw potentially Anderson if everything goes well, that scenario I laid out, or Yoli Chacin, who is definitely going to get a qualifying offer if he pitches well the next 2 years and doesn't sign a long-term extension. So the point is, the Rockies could really have a lot of picks. They could have 8, 9, 10. 10 is probably stretching it, but easily 8 or 9 picks in the top 50 of these next 3 drafts. And that's how you build a foundation in your farm system. Just keep pushing up talent, essentially. So that's why these picks are what these signings of these 5 players, Kendrys Morales, Ubaldo Jimenez, Ervin Santana, Steven Drew, and Nelson Cruz are important to see how much they get paid. And it's also important how guys who are coming up on free agency or on points where the Rockies have to make decisions, specifically De La Rosa, Kadire, and Brett Anderson this year, how they perform. And that's really what I think is interesting right now when you look at now. The first domino to fall here is Masahiro Tanaka, the Japanese pitcher, who you're hearing a lot of it say, well, it doesn't matter if they go to the Yankees or the Dodgers, you may not care too much about that. I mean, you should, because the Dodgers would certainly, if he goes to the Dodgers, it would certainly be a game changer. But the point is, once he signs somewhere, then we're going to start finding out what happens with Ervin Santana and Ubaldo Jimenez. Also, Matt Garza, who does not have a qualifying offer attached to him, but Matt Garza will instantly become more attractive than the other 2 to whatever team loses out on the Masahiro Tanaka signing, because people, again, as we've seen so far, these teams do not want to give up these first-round draft picks. So that's where we're kind of at right now. But even though it's not going to directly affect the Rockies, and I would expect the Rockies to have 0 part in any of these signings, it's still important as to how it impacts them in the future, because if it breaks correctly, they could get a boatload of top 50 draft picks over the next 2 or 3 years, depending on how this breaks. And I think that's really something to keep an eye on. The other thing, if you want to keep an eye on something division-wise, watch what the Diamondbacks do. They said before the winter meetings they were dead set on adding a front-of-the-line starter. They have not done that yet. They obviously added Mark Trumbo when they traded away Tyler Skaggs at the winter meetings in part of that three-way deal with the Angels and White Sox. But they have not added a front-line pitcher yet. They've cleared out a lot of their talent, minus the big snake in Archie Bradley, who's gonna be a huge pitcher for them. But they've cleared out a lot of that top-end talent pitching-wise in that farm system. I think they're very, very likely to add something. And it's going to be interesting if they end up with Ervin Santana or Ubaldo Jimenez. I don't think they're going to end up with Tanaka, but if they're likely to miss out on Tanaka. If they also strike on Gardner, Ubaldo Jimenez could end up in Arizona because they do have money to spend. They've got a local TV contract expiring at the end of the 2015 season. They've got some money to spend there. They say they want to add a frontline starter. The question is, are they willing to part with, I believe, the 16th pick in the first round? If they lose that pick, they are not picking until the late 50s in the second round. That's their first pick. So in what's going to be a very, very deep draft, this has the potential. The 2014 draft has the potential to be the best draft in 2005. That's the one with Tulowitzki and McCutcheon and Ellsbury and Braun and all the big names in that draft. So I would not talk on that level, but I think we're about one step below that potentially for the 2014 draft. But it's interesting because number one, Ubaldo coming to Arizona would be quite a storyline for the Rockies and how that would go. But also, him or Ervin Santana would wipe out a pick everywhere in the top 50. That's the other side of that aspect to watch. But anyway, that's sort of what I'm watching right now. Masahiro Tanaka, and then the 5 dominoes to fall afterward, and I hear a lot of guys too. One other point here. I hear a lot of people saying, the only reason why Ubaldo Jimenez and Ervin Santana have not been paid yet is because they're just waiting for Tanaka to sign. Well, that's true. Part of it is true, but it really has a ton to do with what's going on where these teams do not want to give up first-round draft picks because, well, those two may be waiting for Tanaka to sign somewhere. It does not explain why Cruz, Morales, and Stephen Drew have not signed anywhere yet. And some of these guys may come crawling back to their original teams, particularly Drew and Ubaldo. I think Ubaldo's going to get some attention after Tanaka and Garza go off the board. But that's what we're looking at right now. It's a quiet period in Rockies land right now, but if you watch these signings, it is going to have an impact on the future. So keep an eye on them, and of course, we'll be keeping an eye on them here at Purple Row.